In this video, we're going to examine some issues related to consultants at the Countess of Chester Hospital. This will primarily focus on Dr. Stephen Brearey and Dr. Ravi Jayaram. I should mention as well that there is a gang of 4 consultants that is sometimes referred to as a gang of 7 consultants on the unit, but you will not hear an enormous amount from anyone other than Dr. Brearey and Dr. Jayaram in this video. The reason for that is that the other consultants were to a greater or lesser extent unwilling participants in this process, or they were sort of cajoled along by Brearey and Jayaram. It's clear that these 2 consultants were the ringleader in what occurred at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015, 2016 and 2017. But I must say as well, as I mentioned in the previous video, that Dr. Brearey was undoubtedly the driving force behind this. Now, I'm not quite sure why that was. He was the paediatric lead at the hospital, so this can be a contributing factor. It could be due to various reasons to do with his character. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that because there's simply no way of knowing. So we're going to begin this video by going back to June 2015. And in this early section, we're going to examine what actually occurred on the neonatal unit during this period, and particularly the conduct of Stephen Brearey at this time. So this is INQ 0003110 from the Thirlwell Inquiry, and this is kind of a discussion regarding case notes over Child D who died shortly before this, and this is dated 22nd of June 2015 to 23rd of June 2015. So this is very early on in the process. And we see initially that Dr. Brearey comments that it appears neonatal sepsis following prolonged rupture of membranes is the most likely cause for death. And then he goes on to make this comment here: there does not seem to be any staff, medical or nursing members present at all 3 episodes other than one nurse who was not the nurse responsible for Child D on that shift. So this is very interesting because this is very early on in what would unfold on the unit. There have been a few deaths at this point, but it's nothing out of the ordinary for a neonatal unit. They've had deaths in previous years, and at this point the numbers hadn't even exceeded the deaths that they'd had in previous years. You could say that these deaths had come in close proximity to one another, and it is absolutely right for the paediatricians and the unit as a whole to investigate that matter. But Dr. Brearey here immediately is saying, even though there's no suspicion at this point, he's still looking for commonality among staff. And this is something that I've kind of wrestled with in my own brain for a long time. I'm sure that I'm going to discuss this more as we go on, but I'm sure that every person watching this video and every person that believes this is a miscarriage of justice has at least considered, and many people still believe this, that Lucy was deliberately targeted. And I definitely have believed that, and I don't rule it out. But I could never quite... It just never quite sat right with me because I thought they're taking such an enormous risk to target someone in this way. Why? What? Because she's a little bit rude to them on Datex, or they perceive it that way, or because it'll save the unit, because the unit could be criticised. I mean, that's an enormous risk to take over what are relatively trivial things, particularly in the Datex area. You could perhaps more plausibly suggest that they were concerned about how they may be held responsible for things, but I would still argue it's a big risk to take. But anyway, for a long time I wasn't really sure what to think, and I'm still, to be honest, not sure what to think today. But when I saw this document and the next document I'm going to show you, the risk suddenly gets a lot bigger, because we're talking about June, and then the next document's from July 2015. So this is I'll show you a timeline shortly, but this is way before. There's so much to come, and yet already they're looking for a commonality, as you'll see in the next document. they don't know what's going to happen on the unit. They don't know there's going to be loads of deaths. They don't know there's going to be loads of collapses. So it becomes then less plausible for me that they deliberately fingered her and deliberately scapegoated her. And it becomes, for me, more likely that they became fixated on an idea and that took on a ridiculous degree of momentum, and and their behaviour got worse and worse, as we will see. But there could still be a kind of underlying concern about a commonality. As to why they moved towards this idea so quickly, I don't have an answer to that question. Perhaps they'd seen, there'd been other serial killer nurses, perhaps they were aware of that. I don't know. But it's certainly very strange, inexplicable for me that they were looking at this so early. Brearey's looking at it in June 2015. I can't see any justification for that, and I can definitely understand why people infer from this that they wanted to target Lucy from day one. I personally believe there is an enormous level of risk in that, and I just don't think there would be a premeditated decision to do that at this time, as it's far too risky. But we'll move on to look at the next document. So this is INQ00129886, and this company, Facere Emilius, they're like a kind of healthcare investigative body. They actually wrote a report on the Countess of Chester that no one's allowed to look at. But there are a few documents related to them in the Thirlwell inquiry, and this is one of them, interviewing Yvonne Griffiths in June 2020. So in this document, Yvonne Griffiths mentions that Stephen Brearey picked out in July 2015 that there was commonality with Lucy. So at this time they were putting the shift charts together already and looking to see if one person is on duty. So in the kind of remainder of this section, we're going to look at everything that happened on the unit. When I say everything, this is a relatively short version of what is written in my book in a much more detailed fashion. And even the detailed version that is in my book is still a relatively small fraction of everything that we know about that unit. But I saw maybe 1,000 pages of notes just from Thirlwell documents related to what happened at the hospital between 2015 and 2017. I could write a full-length book just about that. But of course I had to pick the meat out of that to try and make, it's only one section of the book. It needs to be a sensible length. So I've thrown away really good material that I couldn't use. But there is an enormous amount of information regarding what occurred at this hospital. In this video, you'll see an overview of that. But there's going to be a much more detailed version in my book. And as I say, an even more detailed version does exist as well. So then there's a witness statement of Yvonne Griffiths, the same nurse, from June 2024, INQ00102072. And in this document, she points out that she did not change allocation on the unit because of any doubts in Lucy's practice, but instead to stop finger pointing, because finger pointing towards her was very much occurring at this point. So the next document we're going to look at is INQ003112. So some email correspondence here. It's titled as being between Jayaram and Brearey, but we're actually going to look at a comment from Dr. John Gibbs in this document. So he's addressing Stephen Brearey, and I'll read exactly what he says. Steve, since you sadly had the burden of reviewing all the cases up until the recent spate of deaths, was Lucy on duty for all of the unexpected collapses? We know that for the episodes over the past week, Lucy was on duty and actually assigned to care for each neonate who collapsed. Murthy, so this refers to Dr. Murthy Saladi, who will appear later in this video. Murthy says in his email that she was always on duty, and this seems to be the general view, but is this correct? Perhaps you don't know at the moment if this was the case, and I accept that you do not run the neonatal nursing rota, so someone else can check on this at some stage, but I wonder if this was looked into as part of your previous review of the previous cases. We don't need to know right now if Lucy was actually assigned to the neonates in question, because I'm aware for at least one case, as Murthy mentions, that Lucy was not assigned to one of the infants, but was in fact looking after them temporarily one night when they suddenly collapsed whilst the main nurse for that patient was having a break. So for now, we only need to know if she was always on duty for the unexpected, unexplained cases, not that these were expected to be extremely ill, example, so we can't read that bit. So here he is raising the question about whether this statistical coincidence, so we're going to look at the police documents again later in this video, but we know this was handed to the police with no evidence, the only evidence was coincidence. We know there's been enormous criticism of the statistical case used in the court case, and then on top of that, Dr. Gibbs himself, in another document that we're not going to look at in this video, he also questions whether the kind of assumptions they're making are statistically sound. So that's all very interesting that he was kind of a skeptic at this point. Now we're going to move on to look at comments from the aforementioned Dr. Lucy Letby, who was, it seems, a stronger skeptic than Dr. Gibbs. He said, "We have investigated these deaths as much as we can, which included seeking clinical input from outside. The only thing which came out of it, as I understand, is one member of staff was working in the unit, not necessarily with the baby who passed away in each incident, but might have cared for the baby during the staff breaks at the time of all these deaths. This is highly unreliable information, and further outside clinical input is unlikely to help shed more light on the relevance of this information. However, we seem to be acting on this unreliable information. We have moved this particular staff member from night shifts to day shifts and from ITU care to HDU/SCBU care." So this just references Lucy being moved from the neonatal unit to a more administrative role. "When the pattern of the deaths changed, we are becoming, at least those who dealt with the babies during the resuscitation and those who participated in the investigation till now and are aware of the outcome, are becoming even more worried about patient safety and their own mental well-being. This is affecting all of us in one way or other. This is unfair to the staff under suspicion, unfair to parents and other staff who are aware of the situation, and unfair to the staff who are aware of the situation but worried about how things are progressing. I believe we need help from outside agencies who can deal with suspicion. At the moment, we are all under suspicion, and the only agency who can investigate all of us, I believe, is the police. That is the only agency who can know our past history and our life outside the hospital, which might shed more light. I think we should proactively seek their help before we are forced because of further deaths. We will need to understand that those of us who are permanent staff and work on the neonatal unit of the Trust will particularly be under investigation. I think this is better than acting ourselves on unreliable information which opens ourselves to criticism in the future. We should not have had any reason to be suspicious in the first place. Once we have reason to be suspicious, we need to take appropriate action, which in this case is submitting ourselves as a department for external investigation by an independent agency who can do these type of investigations. I am not sure who that is, but I don't think it will be another clinical department who can only look at what is happening inside the hospital. What do you think? So the first thing that I would say about this is that this was a thoroughly decent and self-deprecating or even self-sacrificing statement from Dr. Saladi. One can contrast his attitude with the attitudes of Brearey and Jayaram. It is also said that Saladi had sleepless nights before deciding to ultimately support the so-called Gang of Seven. Secondly, I don't actually agree with him on one critical point. I don't agree that reporting this to the police was the right course of action. I do say this with the benefit of hindsight, having witnessed the Cheshire Constabulary investigation, but I can't see any prospect that the police can properly investigate something that requires medical expertise. If there was to be further investigation, then there should have been a multidisciplinary medical review. Thirdly, the statement from Dr. Saladi supports the idea that the targeting of Lucy wasn't premeditated and that it perhaps gathers some momentum over a period of time because Dr. Saladi ultimately did side with the consultants. Fourthly, it is notable and noticeable that Dr. Stephen Brearey did not go to the police at this time. It is also notable and noticeable that when, as we'll see later in this video, Dr. Brearey and Dr. Jayaram meet with the police in May 2017, they certainly aren't particularly forthcoming with the idea that consultants could be responsible. And then finally, on the other hand, there is no doubt that Dr. Brearey manipulated everyone on the neonatal unit, particularly the other consultants. So with regard to this notion of why this wasn't reported to the police at this time, one thing that I read on Reddit is that if you're a consultant, basically it's almost impossible to get sacked. There'd have to be some incredible medical malpractice. And the other way, according to this post, is to be a whistleblower. And it's clear that Dr. Brearey and Dr. Jayaram didn't want to be whistleblowers, but they did want to get the credit of having been whistleblowers, which is exactly what happened. Ultimately, they took a certain amount of credit in the aftermath of Lucy's conviction, but it's very clear. It's even explicitly indicated in the meeting on the 15th of May 2017 that they don't want to be whistleblowers and they don't want to do whistleblowing. And the reason for that is that it's just an act of self-preservation. They behaved in a way on the unit that was in their interest and that preserved their position on the unit. Now, some people have interpreted this as them deliberately targeting Lucy, and that's an absolutely valid view. I think it was just a sort of an example of self-serving behaviour. But we'll get into that more as the video continues. I also think it needs to be made clear that Dr. Brearey manipulated everyone on this neonatal unit, particularly the other consultants. It's actually completely impossible to go through all of this in one video because there's just so much evidence pointing to this. There were so many conversations, and these are only the conversations we know about, of course. We don't know about conversations that weren't documented, but there's enormous documentation of this in the Thirlwell inquiry. There's no doubt that he manipulated the other consultants, even Jayaram, but particularly the other five that make up this so-called Gang of Seven. He was no doubt the ringleader, and there is no doubt that he was the person who was most fixated on Lucy's supposed guilt, and he became almost obsessed with it, I would say, is a reasonable description. So I'm going to move on now to Lucy's grievance procedure. So some important comments here from Yvonne Griffiths in INQ 0003167 from October 2016. And she mentions that some concerns about commonality and that Arian Powell has created a graph related to who's on duty. The important comment here is that Stephen Brearey was concerned and wanted to grasp at anything that might be linked to pointing the finger. Lucy's documents are excellent, the standard of her work is excellent. Steve Brearey was the only one with concerns prior to the triplets. So that very much backs up what I've just said. He was the driving force behind this. Now, I've spoken to a lot of people that work in the NHS, and they all talk about the kind of bullying. Well, a lot of them talk about the bullying culture and the general culture that exists. And I must say that even in the comments section over the relatively short period of time that I've been doing this channel, the number of comments that I get from people, the number of comments that I even see on other channels where someone says, I worked in the NHS for 20 years, this doesn't surprise me the slightest, is definitely worrying. It doesn't surprise me that there are cultural issues in a big organisation. That's hardly unusual. But I think the extent of it has been a little bit surprising for me in what is supposed to be a caring profession, of course. But I've read so many comments, I've spoken to people that have repeatedly said this. Another thing that people have said almost universally is that consultants are the powerful people in a hospital, and the idea that we've seen this narrative in the media, it was to some extent repeated by the Thirlwell inquiry that, you know, the management bossed the consultants around or intimidated the consultants. It's crystal. I mean, I make this crystal clear in my book. It's crystal clear in the Thirlwell documents. I mean, this is just quite laughable, really. It's quite clear that Stephen Brearey, to use a phrase that someone told me who was an NHS worker, rules the roost on this unit. You can see he's just pushed and pushed and pushed until he got what he wanted, essentially. And it is clear again from this this document here, as I just mentioned, that he was the ringleader, and as it's described here, the finger pointer. So there's another. This is further, so it's still a grievance procedure of Yvonne Griffiths, and this is the text that I particularly want to highlight here. Is Stephen Brearey wanted to go to the chief executive, and we said you can't just do that on a gut feeling. He got Ravi and Dr. V on board. It's not like Stephen Brearey's caused trouble, but we had looked at the information, and the only thing seems to be that Lucy was on duty. Stephen Brearey had voiced concerns prior to the loss of the two triplets. They said if they didn't go to the chief executive, they would be going straight to the police. We were very uncomfortable. Anyway, the point here is, as I said, firstly, Brearey has got Jayaram and this third doctor that remains anonymous on board. The other thing is that they are going on gut feeling. We know this anyway because when it was passed to the police, it was passed with no evidence. But this is a different person, a nurse in the hospital, stating, Stephen Brearey was the driving force. Stephen Brearey wanted to go to the police. Stephen Brearey got the doctors involved. Stephen Brearey, though, didn't have any evidence of anything. He just had this gut feeling that he was correct. So, this is an article from the British Medical Association, and it's talking about the issue of workplace bullying in the NHS. Now, I definitely believe that Lucy was subjected to workplace bullying. That's pretty clear anyway, because all 7 points of a grievance procedure were upheld. And this article warns that a corrosive culture of bullying still exists within parts of the NHS, and the ARM heard how bullying and harassment adversely affects staff and the patients they deliver care to, and should have no place in the NHS. And then it goes on to discuss how NHS organisations should embrace openness and candour, take fundamental attitudinal change to management, and for NHS managers found responsible for bullying and harassment to be held to account. Now, I doubt that's changed since this article was written, but there is a report highlighting there are big problems with bullying, chromonism, and what it describes as a deep-rooted toxic culture. So, I mean, I've heard about this firsthand from people who work in the NHS, and it's really worrying because I think we would all agree the NHS is not in the state it was certainly when I was younger. All of the indicators are really bad, and it's bad enough having this completely false accusation and then imprisonment of Lucy Letby, but then on top of that, if the culture is really toxic as well, it's going to be harder and harder to recruit people. Standards are going to diminish more and more. There's just going to be a kind of inexorable decline in the standard of the NHS, and I don't think anyone wants that to happen. So this is something that I do think needs to be addressed. How you could possibly hope to instigate a meaningful cultural change in the NHS, I don't know. But I think for the purpose of this video, we at least need to be aware of it. So I've written in my book that this whole case of Lucy Letby carries the stench of classism and distinct whiff of misogyny. So I think class and status is a more significant factor in this case, where it's essentially consultants being believed over a nurse and the person at the bottom being hammered by those that can't be challenged. But I also think there is an element of misogyny and sexism, and it's male consultants. I know there was one female consultant, I believe, among the 7, but nevertheless, it is generally male consultants, then male police officers generally, then male experts in court. A lot of men all ganging up on one woman, essentially, who also happens to be lower status than them. So I absolutely stand by this statement, and I think it's a very regrettable reflection of probably the broader culture that exists in the NHS. The next document we're going to look at is INQ 0003155, Minutes of Grievance Hearing, chaired by Annette Weatherly from the 1st of October 2016. In this document, she states that it is clear that the two consultants call the shots and have put pressure on the executive team in making this decision. Lucy's there at this meeting. So that's another indication that this is now Brearey and Jayaram. Brearey's got Jayaram on board, and now it's these two consultants that are dictating what's happening at the hospital. And then we're going to move on to look at another interview from the grievance investigation with Karen Rees, INQ 0002879, again from October 2016. And she indicated that Stephen Brearey was trying to bully people and put pressure on felt that Stephen Brearey was exhibiting passive-aggressive behaviour, remained professional but gently powerful. Stephen Brearey had no concrete evidence. So I've highlighted this in much greater depth in my book, and there's even more information than that available. As I say, you could write an entire book just about what happened between 2015 and 2017, but it should be clear from these documents what was happening on the unit. Now, I think there's a kind of natural inclination to believe that this was premeditated, and they decided from day one that they're going to hammer Lucy and they're going to target her. So I'll be discussing that in the next section. I just want to move on to the next document first. So this is just highlighting what I mentioned previously, that Stephen Brearey had no concrete evidence to back up anything that he was saying. So the next document I want to look at is INQ0017488, which is a questionnaire that Janet Cox has submitted to the Thirlwell Inquiry in April 2024, although for some reason they couldn't publish it until 10 months after this, very mysteriously, until after the public inquiry had finished, because Janet Cox said she thought Lucy Letby was innocent. In this document, she says certain consultants appear to be trying to make Lucy a scapegoat for the increased number of deaths and collapses, just further indicating what was occurring on the unit. The last document that I want to highlight in this section, first of all, let me remind you, just in case people haven't seen this, I've highlighted this in several videos. This is from the police. This is on the 5th of May 2017, first police meeting of Operation Hummingbird, where they say there's no evidence other than coincidence. So no evidence was ever presented on the neonatal unit whatsoever. None. Because it was passed to the police with no evidence. Yeah, as I was saying, the last document I want to highlight is this one, INQ0014376, which is emails between Ian Harvey and Dr. Jane Horden. Dr. Jane Horden is a neonatologist who's brought in to review cases after suspicions were raised. And she said the following: I perceive a combination of understandable professional pride regarding standards of care on the unit, along with concern over unexpected and unexplained events, both of which are entirely reasonable reactions, but both of these should not prevent accepting and learning what could have been improved. Unexpected collapse in an otherwise stable baby is rare, and I agree that there have been more cases than would be expected, especially those for whom there is no explanation of the post-mortem cause of death is in question. The paediatricians infer more cases that I did not study. So I just wanted to highlight this because there is, I do think what she's saying here is reasonable, that the paediatricians that are working on the unit, while they have eventually and throughout this period, you could argue, behaved in a way that is self-serving, I feel quite certain that they are genuinely concerned about what is happening on the unit. Now, because they're self-serving, and all human beings are guilty of this and vulnerable to this, at the very least, they will overlook, or they can overlook, things that they've done. We saw earlier that statement from Dr. Saladi where he says, let's phone the police in and let's accept that we're suspects. That was a very noble thing. Many people are not that noble. But that doesn't mean that they didn't care about what was happening on the unit and that they wanted babies to die. I'm sure it's awful for any doctor to see a young baby pass away. I've never been in that position, and I wouldn't wish to suggest that what is described here as their professional pride regarding standards of care, I wouldn't wish to suggest that wasn't sincere. I'm sure that it was sincere. They did a lot of things that I will criticise strongly, but I do think that they could have been genuinely concerned about what's happening on the unit. So I just wanted to make that clear. And then I want to discuss now the possibilities. So we have in this video seen already some indication of what was occurring on the unit. So there's definitely a culture of bullying, and Lucy was definitely bullied. I believe that Lucy was scapegoated. I'm going to get into this in a second. There is clear concern from the consultants to get Lucy off the unit. And we've seen that Dr. Stephen Brearey is definitely the ringleader of this, and he brings the other consultants along with him, essentially. And then we've seen this comment that he's essentially calling the shots on the unit. So when you add these things all up together, as I mentioned, over the last 2 years, I've tried to work out what's going on here. I think at some point everyone has believed that Lucy was deliberately targeted. And I've had this belief myself, and I'm not ruling it out now. But my feeling or my thought about this always was they're taking an absolutely enormous risk over something that they don't really benefit from that much. Particularly if it's just Lucy filled in too many datex sheets. That could be a reason they don't like her, and it could be a reason they want to get rid of her. But then you've got to remember as well, Lucy believed that she had a perfectly adequate working relationship with these people. So it's not like there was some massive or even tangible animosity. So any private feeling, any feelings they had about her were private, for sure. Because Lucy thought she got on fine with them and worked fine with them. So, to me, the fact that, yes, I've heard, and I've outlined this in the book, consultants don't like being called out on things, and if Lucy is filling in datex as diligently as is suggested, and that's stated by nursing colleagues on the unit, then it's possible that she could have been irksome for the consultants. But I don't think that's a big enough reason for them to say, right, we'll just accuse her of mass murder. That's just too much. I mean, that's a pretty monstrous thing to do over some datex things, firstly. And then secondly, you know, how would they possibly know that it was going to work out well for them? It could be calamitous. You know, they could have referred this to the police. Basically, the only reason this has been advanced is because of Dr. Evans. Dr. Evans is primarily responsible for this, because if a competent neonatologist had walked in, the kind of people that are on the panel now, although not even necessarily someone of their status, they just would have blown the whole thing away. They would have said, well, there could be any number of medical causes, here's my opinion, and there would have been no investigation, that would have been it. Then Dr. Brearey, Dr. Jayaram, all the other consultants are facing a very difficult situation for them, potentially. And of course, even though Lucy did go to court, Lucy did go to prison, right now as we're sitting here today, the consultants are facing a very difficult situation. So if they were going to deliberately target someone, there needs to be a very good explanation, in my opinion. And I just don't think Lucy was a bit difficult on the unit, and babies started dying, and we didn't want to be blamed for it. We didn't want the unit to look bad, so we just decided to blame it all on her. For me, that risk is too high for the reward, firstly. And then secondly, the fact that it begins in June and July 2015, as we've seen in this video, that indicates to me that the risk is even greater, because they don't know what's going to happen in the future. So there's only been a very small amount of deaths at that point. And for them to premeditatedly think, right, we're just going to shaft Lucy down, we're just going to get her referred to the police for murder, and that would be pretty risky from a professional perspective. And you're talking about some pretty unethical and immoral behaviour. Now, I completely understand why people think that, but I just don't quite know whether there is the evidence there to support this. And I think it's more likely that they were genuinely concerned, and that's just escalated into some pretty terrible behaviour, in my opinion. So to kind of sum this up, we all know that Lucy's innocent. Obviously, there's a very small number of people that watch this channel who occasionally comment. I don't know how many watch it and think that she's guilty, but I get a few comments. The overwhelming majority of people that watch this will probably believe at the very least that it's an unsafe conviction. Probably some people haven't decided, but I think people that look at the case in depth, with what we know now, the vast majority of people believe that Lucy's innocent. But there are three big bones of contention at the heart of this story. The first one is, was Lucy deliberately targeted by consultants on the unit? The second one is, did Dewi Evans consciously attempt to fit his so-called diagnoses so that they would support malignant harm and the case would go to court? And the third one is, did the police act in good faith during their investigation? So I have an opinion on 2 and 3. Well, I have an opinion on all of them, but I'll do them in reverse order. Because number 3, I believe the police did act in good faith at all times, and they've just done an extremely lousy investigation, and they've allowed the consultants to walk in there on the 15th of May and pull the wool over their eyes. And they got very confused. They've done the same with Dr. Evans. They've shown their incompetence and stupidity, but I don't think they acted in good faith. Now, whether they're acting in good faith today is another matter entirely. I don't believe that they are. Frankly, I think the arrest of the executives is diabolical and wrong, and it's clear that they're just trying to defend their prosecution and defend their reputation. Well, you can forget about that because your reputation is going to crumble. It should have crumbled by now. I mean, it frankly is crumbling every day, but eventually, I hope the police face some serious consequences, but I don't think they acted in anything other than good faith. They just don't know how to run an investigation. Number two, I'm not going to express an opinion on this because I can't prove my opinion. I think people will be able to infer from that what my opinion is. And as for the first one, I'm going to discuss this in a bit more depth still. I absolutely believe that Lucy was scapegoated on the unit. So you may think that's a contradiction if I don't believe that she was deliberately targeted, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit now. So essentially, scapegoating doesn't have to be deliberate. It can be an unconscious process. It's often associated with blaming someone for something and deliberately setting out to ensure that they are indeed blamed for it. And this is what is described firstly, deliberate scapegoating, where a person or group intentionally shifts blame or negative attention to someone else, knowing that they aren't truly responsible. This is often calculated, strategic, and meant to protect the real culprit or avoid consequences. The second one is unconscious scapegoating, where people may genuinely believe the scapegoated person is the problem because of biases, stereotypes, or emotional dynamics, or there can be other reasons as well, apart from those three reasons listed there. In groups, this can emerge through subtle psychological mechanisms, projection, unloading one's own flaws or discomfort on someone else. Groupthink, the group collectively reinforces the idea that one member is the cause of problems without critically examining evidence, which is the most relevant in this case. Stress relief, focusing frustration on one's safe target to avoid confronting more complex or threatening issues. So with regard to this, I absolutely believe that Lucy was scapegoated. The only way she was not scapegoated is if she's guilty, which I certainly do not believe to be the case. But I think it was probably unconscious scapegoating, where the consultants initially believed that they were correct. So I'll just wind you back to June and July 2015. So already they're looking at whether there's commonality on the shift pattern here in June 2015, and they've drawn a chart. Brearey's drawing a chart up in July 2015. Now, it's possible that occurred because he decided to deliberately target Lucy Letby, but I think more likely is that they were, I just believe it's a massive overreaction at this point, but for some reason they became very concerned about deaths occurring when they didn't expect them. And they were, we know this is not a great unit. We know they made mistakes. We know they haven't got the expertise. We know they've been downgraded. So in their reality, they're just thinking there's no explanation for this, when really there could be very good explanations for it that they just don't understand. So I want to show you the timeline of this as well. So the first death on the unit is 8th of June 2015. So this is only 2 weeks before Stephen Brearey's first looking at commonality on the unit, and by July he's already seriously looking into it. So we go down here. This essentially occurs on the day that Child D dies. This says murder because it's an old Guardian article. So on this day he's already thinking, well, we've had 3 deaths in 2 weeks, which is an unusual number for them. Over the year as a whole, it's not necessarily disastrous, but they don't usually have 3 babies dying in 2 weeks. So that can kind of prick their interest and make. Of course, they not only could it should prick their interest, because 3 babies shouldn't be dying there every 2 weeks. Clearly, it can happen. Obviously, we know it can happen, and we now know a lot more about why it's happened. But from their perspective, they're just thinking we're doing everything we were doing before, and now 3 babies have died in 2 weeks, and we don't have good answers for it. Now, I think there's been an overreach, and Brearey started thinking, could there be a malignant person on the unit? Which I think is crazy, and it's a massive overreach based on the evidence they had at the time, and of course based on the evidence they put in the court case. But I just think that this idea has somehow gathered momentum that I'm going to discuss in a second. But the point is, look at all this stuff that is still to come. There's all this stuff still to come. They just had no idea that was going to happen. Back in June, July 2015, they had no idea a load of babies were going to die. There were going to be more than double the deaths over the next year, and other incidents that cause concern, etc., etc. Now, I don't. You could argue, quite reasonably, that it's not an enormous amount of deaths, but these are the only. Of course, we're only seeing here the indictment deaths. We're not seeing the 18 deaths on the unit over the period. Now, we obviously look at the unit with the benefit of hindsight, and we think, well, there was sewage, there was pseudomonas, there were mistakes, they screwed up, they were understaffed, they were underskilled, they were getting bank staff in, they were transporting babies around all over the place, they were too crowded, there were too many cots, all the things that we know that we could go on listing at great length. But when you're in the eye of the hurricane, you sometimes don't see what's going wrong. And when 18 babies that are born on your unit die in a period of a year, and it begins with 3 happening in 2 weeks, then I think it's quite easy and quite feasible for them to start going down the wrong path. Now, once they started going down that path, there was some despicable, disturbing behaviour on this unit towards Lucy, and just broadly speaking. But I think the initial germ of the idea can be from a genuine concern. That doesn't mean that it definitely is, and I'm going to discuss all the options in a second, but I personally think that's the most likely scenario. So I'm going to read a quote to you from someone that's in my book. I wasn't going to read this, but I do want to share this with people now. And this is referring to some very, very high-level meetings that have occurred. Couldn't be any higher level. And the quote begins, essentially, with any issue, one position can develop to such an extent that it develops a kind of gravitational attraction. At this point, any view that differs from it is diverging from this central set of opinions. And then, if there isn't a critical mass of people who enter into the process with a different view, the prevailing view becomes cemented, even if there are dissenters. This is particularly dangerous when the assenters of those in the group are highly similar, and even more so when the people doing the thinking are highly similar themselves. And both of those things are tangible in the chain of events around the consultants, which is why I think that groupthink was such a danger, and why the consultants appear to have determinedly followed a certain course without seemingly having any evidence to support their view. So I personally think that is the most likely explanation for why they fingered Lucy so early. And then this is a discussion that occurred on the unit where Dr. Ravi Jayaram is raising something, and he's told by Chambers that this would be a convenient explanation for you, but there must be something else. So when you this kind of gravitational attraction that I've just described, when the view is also self-serving and serves your interest, then suddenly that view can gain momentum very quickly, and then once it's like a stone rolling down a hill, nothing can stop it. And then people start behaving in the way that they did on this unit, which was totally unacceptable, unprofessional, and should never have happened. So essentially there are 3 possibilities with regard to this issue. The first one is that Lucy could have been deliberately targeted from day one. The second one is that it could have started out with genuine concern and evolved into a more conscious targeting. And the third possibility is that it could have started out with genuine concern and gained unstoppable momentum as more problems emerged, and the consultants, led by Brearey, became more fixated with this idea. So before we go into the final section of this video, I just want to explain a few things. The first thing is that I've got enormous gratitude for having a platform and support and a community. It's been incredible. It's not something I expected to happen. I didn't plan to do YouTube, and the level of support I've received is insane. And 99.9% of feedback that I receive is positive, very positive, and that's appreciated more than I can tell you. I really, really appreciate it. When I gave a slightly flippant view of the consultants in the previous video, I suppose it was a very rare occasion where I got some negative feedback, which is fine. People have got a right to express that, and I discussed it with people, and I think that they could see where I was coming from. One thing I just want to mention to you at this point is that there are legal issues and legal considerations for me, and I do have to be a little bit careful about what I say, because this is very serious. I mean, the subject is very serious, and there can be very serious consequences. Therefore, I can't just sling mud at people in a haphazard way. In my previous video, I've gone in pretty hard on Dr. Evans. That's because I can 100% prove everything that I've said. Even in that video, as I mentioned, I didn't express an opinion on whether or not Dr. Evans indeed did decide what he was going to do before he reached the police station. Now, you can probably guess what my opinion is on this, but I'm not going to state that because I can't prove it. And even when people are commenting on the comment sections, people often say things that I agree with that I can't endorse, or I feel I shouldn't endorse, because not because of the legal consequences always, although sometimes there can be, but I just feel that I should set myself a certain standard, and you guys are free to comment and to let all the passion out that you've got and all the strong feelings that we all feel, and I'll just try to stick to what I can prove. And that's kind of like my guiding principle. I don't like to rely on supposition, because that is what the case against Lucy herself is based on. And also, particularly, I haven't spoken about... I wanted to talk about this for so long. Like, I've written about this consultants in my book extensively, like more than anyone else has, revealing things that are not commonly known, and the police. And I wanted to talk about it on the channel before now, but it's just been difficult for legal reasons, and particularly with the police and Jayaram facing perjury allegations, it makes it a lot more difficult, and I don't want to do anything that's going to damage Lucy's prospects. So hopefully more will come out in the future at the right time. But everything that I ultimately do on this channel is as conscientious as possible. I try to hold myself to the standards that would be required if I was to be broadcast on TV. Even then, some of this would not be broadcastable on TV because lawyers would shake their heads at me. Now, I've written a lot in my book, and I don't know if all of that will be green-lighted yet. Lawyers will have an opinion, publishers will have an opinion, we'll have to wait and see. Something that you don't know is that I've been trying to do things in the background constantly, and the vast majority of these things have not come off. I'd say virtually all of them, in fact, have run into a roadblock, either a legal roadblock, logistical roadblock, other problems. I'm still working on stuff now, so hopefully they're going to happen, but there's no guarantee. You just have to keep trying, keep pushing, and keep doing everything we can. So that's the kind of climate that you're working in, and there's nothing I can do about that. I just have to behave as responsibly as I can. So I try not to put anything on the channel unless I 100% believe it to be true, and I can 100% prove it with documents and research. And I try to reduce supposition to zero, if possible. I think I'm entitled to give an opinion occasionally, and I think I'm entitled to engage in supposition occasionally, but I really try to limit that to virtually nothing. So I just wanted to summarise my position on this, really. Was Lucy scapegoated? Absolutely. The only way that she wasn't scapegoated would be if she was guilty, which obviously isn't true. Am I dismissing the view that she was deliberately scapegoated? Absolutely not. I have believed this myself at times. I still think it's possible. I just don't think it's the most likely explanation. I couldn't say for sure. There's no way I can say for sure. Do I know that she wasn't deliberately scapegoated? Absolutely not. Could I be wrong in my view? Definitely. Am I a critic of the conduct of the consultants? Absolutely. Can I prove that the consultants did this consciously? No, I can't. And that's really at the heart of this. Truth, integrity and justice must be at the heart of everything that I do, and it's very important that I maintain these standards. It feels good to go in hard on these people that we feel a huge amount of resentment towards, and rightly so. And I enjoyed giving Evans a thorough clobbering in the last video, but it has to be backed up by the facts. If I can't back it up factually, then I won't go there, not least because there are so many things that I can show factually. It can definitely be inferred that the consultants deliberately target Lucy, and this could very well be correct, but I just cannot prove it. What I can do is show you the facts and allow you to make up your own mind. And, I would never dismiss or disparage anyone disagreeing with me. I can easily be wrong. It's just my opinion. And I don't want to speak for Lucy, but she does the trials, Lucy Letby Twitter, that I'm sure you're aware of. And I think we'd both be guided by that principle of just, if we can prove it, we'll say it. If we can't prove it, we won't say it. However, I will keep trying. I will do anything that I possibly can for Lucy, but not also for Lucy, also for patient safety in the NHS and the concept of a fair trial in the UK. When I started doing this, I decided, before I started writing a book, I decided, are you ready to completely change your life so that you're never anonymous ever again and your life changes significantly, perhaps beyond all recognition? And I decided, yes, I'm ready to do that because this is too important not to do it. I'm in a position to do it. Not many people will be. So I've got the experience of having written and edited 50 books as an author and ghostwriter. And I can do this. I know a lot about the case. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. So if that means putting myself in the public eye, I definitely will do it. Whatever is required, I will do it. And if it takes 10 to 15 years, I'll still be here in 10 to 15 years from now because this is too important to let go. I want to emphasise that I will not let people down and I won't let Lucy down. Mark Mays described me as a Trojan a while ago, which was very cute and flattering, but I haven't even got started on this yet. This is just the beginning. I absolutely will not stop until this is overturned. What has happened to Lucy is horrifyingly unjust, and we need to get her out of prison as soon as possible. Just today, someone mentioned to me something about her crying, being in Karen Reese. Karen Reese is comforting her, and she's going, "Why are they doing this to me? Why are they doing this to me?" I mean, this is what has happened to Lucy is devastatingly awful, and I just will not stop until it's over, and that won't be, and that's just the beginning, because after that I will campaign for reform of the criminal justice system. I'll be writing further books on miscarriages of justice and related topics. I'm not sure what will happen to this channel after Lucy's release, but I will certainly keep it going. There are always issues to address. Perhaps it can become more diverse. We'll have to wait and see. But I'm not only committed to Lucy, but I want to work in this field until, as long as I'm still breathing. When I stop breathing, I'll have to stop. But until then, I'll be doing this. Well, maybe if I'm in palliative care, I'll stop. But as long as I'm fit enough and well enough to do it, then I'll be working in this field for the rest of my life. And I would like to do other stuff as well, but I've realised how important this is, and if I can get a small voice in this, then I will definitely use that as fearlessly as I can. And I want to be clear that I promise I'll never let my community down and the people that have supported me, because I'm literally nothing without you, and it's been amazing, really, in 4 months of posting to rise to the number of views and the amount of attention that I get now is sensational. And I mean, I'm so grateful, and I really wish I could organise a picnic. But at the end of the day, I've already got 2,500 subscribers, and it's already what if 1,000 of you turn up? I just don't think that's possible. But I wish I could meet you all and shake all your hands, but unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be feasible. But I hope I can meet some of you. I have met some people from the channel who comment already, but I hope I can meet more of you in the future for sure. So some of the conduct of the consultants on the unit was utterly despicable, but they can behave in this way, and the underlying motivation can still be that they genuinely believe Lucy's harming babies, even though they're completely wrong. With that being said, let me move on to the concluding section of this video, which is very, very important. This is the most important section in this video, which is why I've pinned a comment related to this. I want people to listen to this very carefully, and people need to know this and know what happened and why it just makes the whole thing so utterly farcical. What is absolutely 100% certain is that there has been a systematic campaign to have Lucy Letby thrown off the unit, and Stephen Brearey has been the ringleader. That is undeniable. That is in the Thirlwall documents, and I've read every single one. I know exactly what happened on that unit. Whether it was conscious or whether at some stage they thought the ends justified the means is kind of irrelevant, really. It's absolutely 100% definitely the case that Lucy was campaigned against systematically for 2 years on that unit. And then sometime after that, the systematic campaign has been run. We then have Brearey and Jayaram meeting with Cheshire Police on the 15th of May. In a video next week, I'm going to go through everything that happened at this meeting and analyse the comments that were made by Brearey and Jayaram. But as I said previously, they essentially seeded Cheshire Police with information of varying degrees of accuracy. The problem that we have here is that the police completely accepted the consultants. They frankly put the consultants on a pedestal, and so just 6 days after they conceded that they had no evidence, they announced to The Guardian that they were investigating the Countess of Chester. Then on the 18th of May, as we learnt in the previous video, Dr. Evans sees this in the paper, in the Guardian. So I have compared this in my head to when in the Terminator series they turn on Skynet. So at this point, there's really no turning back. I suppose the one retribution for Lucy at this point could have been if the defence had answered Nina Modi. If the defence had answered Nina Modi, then who knows who could have been in, who knows what experts could have been in court in Lucy's defence, but they didn't do that. So this was kind of a calamitous moment where there was no turning back. So I'm going to look at this document we've actually looked at previously in this video. It's INQ0003167. Again, this is Yvonne Griffiths during the grievance procedure at Lucy Letby. And in this document, she says, Stephen Brearey was concerned and wanted to grasp at anything that might be linked to point the finger, as I mentioned earlier. Now, in the book of Judith Moritz, we see this passage that I'm going to read out in full. 9 months had passed since Steve Brearey and Ravi Jayaram, notice it's Steve because she's friends with him, had first sat down with Cheshire Police. Since then, news had spread that the police were investigating and parents were worried. Some had babies who'd spent time on the neonatal unit and they wanted to know if their babies may have been mistreated. Brearey and Jayaram took many of the calls, offering reassurance where they could and passing any worrying cases onto the police. So, firstly, you can't involve the accusers in the investigation. This is farcical. It is such stupendously bad practice from Cheshire Police. It's really hard to understand how it was allowed to happen. Secondly, the question would be at this point, is it likely that Brearey and Jayaram would pass on cases that don't involve Lucy Letby? And how can they possibly be objective about the selection of cases when Brearey in particular has run a 2-year campaign to have her thrown off the unit? Thirdly, are Brearey and Jayaram likely to highlight things that they have done wrong? I would say probably not. Now we're going to move on to an Observer article that was published in the immediate aftermath of Lucy's conviction. This was written by Josh Halliday, who's since very much changed his opinion, but thank God he wrote this article because there's some really important stuff in it. So the first thing that this article says is that in May 2016, by which time there had been 5 deaths on the unit, a hospital manager produced a 2-page document. Actually, there'd been more than 5 deaths because there were non-indictment babies probably. A hospital manager produced a 2-page document responding to the concerns of Brearey and his fellow consultant paediatricians. It was the first time anyone beyond the senior doctors had initiated a formal review of the concerns, despite their gravity. It began, "There is no evidence whatsoever against Lucy Letby other than coincidence." So we're hearing this yet again. So there was never any evidence. They never produced any evidence. The first time there was any evidence in this case, or they ever said anything of any substance, was in the 15th of May meeting with the police. This is a year after Dr. Saladi has said you should go to the police. In the next year, they did nothing other than run a massive campaign against Lucy Letby and say to the consultants, pestered them to refer this to the police. That's literally all they did for the next year. And we know for a fact it was referred with no evidence other than coincidence. So next week, we'll look at what actually happened in that meeting. We can't do it in this video because it'll go on too long. I was talking about all of the concerns in one of our meetings with the executives in early July 2016, and Chambers' response was, well, that would be very convenient. So we heard that discussion, quotation earlier, said by Brearey. A second senior doctor corroborated Brearey's recollection of the meeting on the 4th of July 2016. According to the doctors, Chambers was implying that the deaths and unusual collapses were a result of poor care rather than deliberate harm. It just astonished me that attitude which I think was shared with most of the other executives and probably stemmed from the sort of culture that he gave to the trust as a chief executive, said Brearey. So obviously that's a very self-serving comment, because in my view the remark of Chambers that this would be very convenient was an entirely reasonable remark. It should be noted that he denies saying this, but I can easily imagine that he did say it, and of course it's an entirely fair observation, I would say. So then we have Brearey's colleague Jayaram saying that he could have punched the air when the now retired Detective Chief Superintendent Nigel Wenham listened to the consultants and said that their concerns were something that the police have to be involved with. So I ask you the rhetorical question: how appropriate is it to have someone who punched the air when he heard that there was a police investigation, then working closely with the police and passing suspicious cases to them? I ask you that question rhetorically. Then we'll move on to the next thing. DS Paul Hughes, Einstein, Brains, however we would wish to describe him, who led the investigation, told The Observer the information provided by Brearey and his colleagues had been the golden thread for their inquiry. They have been very brave in coming forward, and they've put this ahead of their careers, in my view. So firstly, before we begin to analyse this in more depth, they haven't been very brave. If they were brave, they would have done what Dr. Saladi suggested 11 months earlier and referred the case to the police or become proper whistleblowers. They've in fact done the most cowardly thing that they possibly could. And the reason they've done that is precisely to ensure that they don't have to put their careers on the line. But we can't expect Mr. Hughes to understand this, obviously. If it wasn't for their ongoing determination, would there have been more murders? I don't know. It's difficult to answer or speculate on the future, but they've done well. And then the article goes on to say, if there was a smoking gun in this medically complex case, it was uncovered by one of Letby's colleagues. On the night before Valentine's Day in February 2018, nearly a year after police launched their investigation, Brearey was hunched over his computer screen when he spotted something unusual. He had been asked by detectives to review the care of siblings and twins on the unit and was looking at the records of a 7-day-old boy. The infant known as Child F had suffered a serious collapse on the unit in August 2015, a day after his twin brother had died unexpectedly. In the very last paragraph of Child F's discharge letter was a line about his insulin level and the level of another hormone called C-peptide. In normal readings, the insulin level would be between 200 and 300. For Child F, it was 4,657. The results also showed a very low C-peptide level. It was conclusive proof that he had been poisoned. Letby had laced his feeding bag with insulin a day after fatally injecting air into the bloodstream of his 6-day-old twin brother. It was a miracle that Child F had survived. I just had this gut-wrenching moment. What the is this? Said Brearey. It was a smoking gun. You saw it there in plain sight. If there was any iota of doubt about her guilt, it was removed then. It was, said DCI Nicola Evans, a real milestone in the investigation. We were shot to the core, she said. I'm not going to commentate on this at this point because I'm going to summarise this at the end. So this is a Vanity Fair article in which it is again confirmed that Dr. Stephen Brearey identified the insulin cases that are central to the whole prosecution. I'm not going to read this out because it basically says the same thing, but it just shows you that there's a second source for this information. So then, not only do we have Dr. Brearey and Dr. Jayaram working closely with the police, far too closely, some might say, but then they appear in the court case, constantly giving testimony against Lucy Letby. So one of the more ridiculous things that Dr. Brearey said was this quote that I've highlighted before: the fact that things in terms of practices were going from good to better, the fact we were working on a very good unit that normally had very good results, this all became exceptional. And then we stopped to take a step back and think about it. But actually, we know that's untrue. We know that he was thinking about commonality very early on. So even that's an untrue statement. And then, of course, Dr. Jayaram now has this email in which he gives a completely different version of events for Child K, for which his testimony is the only evidence in the court case. So in summary, Dr. Stephen Brearey first mentioned a commonality being a consideration in June 2015. He was seriously exploring this possibility from July 2015. While Dr. Ravi Jayaram has been involved as well, it is clear that Dr. Stephen Brearey was the ringleader of a systematic campaign against Lucy Letby on the neonatal unit during 2015 and 2016. I should say that extended into 2017 as well. It is certain that Lucy Letby has been scapegoated. There are three possibilities with regard to this. She could have been deliberately targeted from day one. It could have started out with genuine concern and evolved into a more conscious targeting. It could have started out with genuine concern and gained unstoppable momentum as more problems emerged and the consultants, led by Brearey, became more fixated with this idea. It is very hard to say which one of these three applies. What can be said with absolute certainty is that Lucy Letby was treated very poorly on the unit and would have had excellent grounds for unfair dismissal if she'd chosen to pursue this. It is clear and undeniable that Cheshire Police were convinced to investigate this case solely by a meeting with Dr. Brearey and Dr. Jayaram. Cheshire Police then actively involve Brearey and Jayaram in the investigation, relying on them to select cases. This can only be described as stupendously inappropriate. During this process, Dr. Stephen Brearey identifies the supposed insulin poisoning cases which would be central in the entire indictment against Lucy Letby. This was reported to both the Observer and Vanity Fair. And then both Dr. Brearey and Dr. Jayaram gave evidence against Lucy Letby in court. We therefore have the surreal and hugely prejudicing spectacle of Brearey and Jayaram being the accusers, investigators and prosecutors. Such was the importance of these two consultants in the investigation that the leader of the Cheshire Constabulary investigation into the Countess of Chester, DCI Paul Hughes, described the information as the golden thread in the whole investigation. So it's difficult for me to add anything in conclusion to that picture that I've just given you in the summary. What I can say is that these two gentlemen have some very serious questions to answer, and Cheshire Police also have some very serious questions to answer. I honestly don't think I want to add any more than that, because I think what is presented in this video frankly speaks for itself. Finally, the support that I've received and the growth in this channel has been incredible. I'll tell you a true story. This is absolutely true. When I started this channel, I was originally going to give my initial video to someone else, and I made a video about Thirlwall because I thought someone had to do it and I could do it, so I did. I mean, I didn't have any intention to have a YouTube channel at all. I was just literally going to give that video to someone else, and they were going to put it on their channel, and they just said, well, why don't you... they didn't think that was quite right. They thought I should do it, so I started my own channel, and then it's grown exponentially, incredibly. I'm blown away by the support. All I can do in exchange is just keep doing the level of content, the standard of content that I'm doing now, and that's what I'll try to do. With that being said, I still get more than double views for video than I've got subscribers. I'm really grateful they've grown by like 1,000 in the last month. That's crazy, but if you're not subscribed and you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to hear more from me and more on this very important topic, then please do subscribe, as it really helps me. And if you could also like, and always love to read your comments and try to respond to as many as I possibly can. It's getting more and more, so I've had to cut down slightly, but I still think I answer 80% of them. So that's really appreciated and really enjoyable. But yeah, if I could just shamelessly beg people to subscribe, that would be really appreciated, and any likes and comments are also subscribed as well. So if you have any queries, comments, suggestions, observations, anything else, please do leave them in the comments, and I'll look forward to reading them.